Hello, everyone. For this discussion, we will head to the distant Falkland Islands. This will be the first installment of a new series covering the 10-week war between the United Kingdom and Argentina. This short war took place in the spring of 1982 and involves the UK's defense of its two dependent territories, the Falkland Islands, or Malvinas, as known by the Argentines, and South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands, which you can see here on the right. As Georgia is mostly uninhabited, the vast majority of the fighting did take place on the land and the water around the Falkland Islands, with particular focus on the port village of Stanley. British forces executed a difficult but successful defensive campaign against the Argentinians, despite the disadvantage of being more than 8,000 miles from the UK. As you can see here, if we pan out, just an incredible distance that the logisticians had to work against. Here's the UK all the way up here. 8,000 miles. One operational message that I think I would like to front load is the message that the British joint forces demonstrated that training, tactics, and strategy are often more important than raw military might and home field advantage. This campaign is a model case study for the difficulties of the projection of power, and it reinforced the importance of maintaining air superiority at all costs. In future installments, I will get granular as I plan to examine some of the tactical battles and technologies introduced in this conflict, such as the Harrier VTOL, its vertical takeoff and landing jet, which was a transformational aspect of CAS, or close air support, and the Exocet anti-ship missile. For now, let's examine the road to war in an effort to better contextualize this brief but highly impactful conflict for both the British people and the Argentinians. For centuries prior to the start of this conflict, the South American nation of Argentina and the United Kingdom struggled over the sovereign entitlement to the Falkland Islands. Tensions between these two nations over these islands dates back to the 16th century. And it is quite evident that many of these tensions have arisen out of deep-seated cultural and social misgivings. Add to this political instability, external influences, and the dynamics of posturing at the height of the Cold War, and it is clear that the perfect storm had materialized to transform this largely insignificant island chain into a centerpiece for an Anglo-Argentine conflict. Amid serious internal strife, the Argentine junta was desperate to regain public support, as it had so clearly achieved during the Perón era. General Galtieri's strategy was to reunify the nation through the symbolic reclamation of the Islas Malvinas, a strategy that may have been productive in the short term, but as will be discussed, a flawed long-term strategy for the leadership of his people. On the other end of the Atlantic, Britain received the news of the invasion of one of its last remaining colonies and went into action. With less fervor but no less nationalism, the Thatcher administration went to work in an effort to immediately explore all of its options. With a determination to forcefully defend the Falkland Islands, little room was left for negotiations. Some bold actions were taken by Britain's Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, actions which would define her as a strong leader of Britain, as the reinvigoration of nationalism had awoken this dormant world empire. While domestic influences seemed to drive both nations to war, there were external forces that similarly helped to precipitate the conflict. Argentina was concerned with its standing in South America, and as the premier South American nation, their concern was that in order to be respected as the leading force in South America, they needed to establish once and for all their sovereignty over the Malvinas. General Galtieri recognized that more was needed than simple posturing, and he led his nation to war on this premise. For Britain, the external influences to take action over the invasion were more significant. This is in my opinion. A well-respected and principled member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, had been attacked, and to do nothing in response at the height of the Cold War, this was 1982, would have amounted to far more than the physical loss of the Falkland Islands. Margaret Thatcher recognized the importance of making a firm stand in the defense of these islands, and did so with bold determination. She led her nation to war in a gamble that demonstrated her remarkable leadership. Many mistakes and miscalculations can be attributed to both sides of the leadership in the lead up to this conflict, during the conflict, and after the resulting British victory. In this context, I mean the leadership to encompass the policymakers, the intelligence analysts, and the military commanders, at least in the strategic sense. An intelligence failure is often attributed to being a political failure as well. And Britain, despite its victory in this conflict, certainly had its share of mistakes in the handling of the Falklands invasion. It seems that Britain had been largely uncommitted to finding a long-term solution to the sovereignty of the Falklands and had also failed to take the Argentinians' claims seriously. This was an error, in my opinion. This helped to shape an attitude of complacency among the leadership, the military, and the people of Britain, which in itself had been the most strategic or significant strategic error in that Britain failed to perceive Argentina as a real threat. Needless to say, as in most conflicts, a great many lessons were learned in the months, years, and even decades following this conflict. They're still studying today. We're talking about it now, at least I am. It's 2023, so what, 40 years later? Political, domestic, and external military, tactical and strategic, and the always useful production of timely intelligence. Lessons were learned as a part of the geopolitical landscape is concerned in the tense Cold War environment of the early 1980s. All of these lessons are still being learned today and serve as a reminder of the volatility of sudden and unannounced warfare. As previously stated, claims for the sovereign entitlement to the Falkland Islands dates back to the 16th century when landings occurred by British, French, and Spanish explorers. No officially recognized claims were made, and in the years and decades following, the islands were not much more than a minor point of interest and/or stopping-off point. In the 18th century, with the advent of long-distance ocean-going vessels, the islands became more important as they were now seen as having significant strategic value. In 1833, Britain seized control of the islands in the first real effort to maintain a continuous and active settlement. Britain has successfully done just that. They have maintained the Falklands as a colony, varying in population since this original force was deployed in 1833 to take control of the island chain. This has been the major argument in support of the British sovereign claim to the Falklands, the continuous occupation of the islands by its settlers. The settlers have always maintained their nationalism to be closely associated with that of Britain, as it is Britain that is claimed by the Falklanders as their parent country or fatherland. The self-determination of the Falklanders to maintain their island as an inherent part of the United Kingdom has been the driving force that has mitigated serious incursions by the Argentines between 1833 and 1982. The Argentine claim to the islands is based upon Spanish conquest and demarcation lines established by the Catholic Church hundreds of years before any British settlement was established. Here's the problem. As the Spanish Empire eventually passed regional rights of claim to the Argentines and their drafting of a constitution took place in 1853, the islands became the official sovereign territory of Argentina, at least according to the Catholic Church. In the 20th century, a relationship was established between Britain and Argentina with the intent of establishing some common ground regarding the permanent disposition of the islands. In the 1960s, however, the relationship became quite strained when the United Nations enacted Resolution 1514, which called for an end to colonialism. The Falklands had been officially listed as a colony of the United Kingdom, and as such, the Argentines objected to the continued occupation by British origin islanders and began a campaign to enforce both the old papal claim as well as the new UN resolution. In 1971, after secret talks between the British and Argentine governments, an agreement known as the Communications Agreement was signed and put into effect. This agreement established direct links between the islands and the Argentine mainland to facilitate expedited air and sea shipments. Provisions to the agreement included the issuing of Argentine identity cards to islanders and postal and phone services provided by Buenos Aires providers. The underlying message was that the islands were to be reliant on Argentina for its support, which only exacerbated tensions, especially among the islanders. In 1975, the British government became interested in the economic potential of the Falklands and mandated that an economic survey of the islands be conducted. Lord Edward Shackleton, the son of the famous Antarctic explorer, was assigned the task of conducting this survey. The task was not easily accomplished as Argentina objected furiously over the mandate and was refused travel to the islands via Argentina. So to remedy this, Lord Shackleton was transported or journeyed aboard the Royal Research ship Shackleton to the islands. And before arriving, the ship was fired upon by the Argentine destroyer Almirante Storni. The report was finally delivered in 1977 and was said to have claimed that significant economic potential existed on and around the islands, to include the possibility of oil deposits under the islands. So in 1976, the domestic political situation changed dramatically for Argentina when a military junta took control of the government. A shift in tactics and policies were evident as Argentina stepped up its military presence around the Falklands, which included the establishment of a covert military base on southern Toul. So southern Toul is way south. I'm not sure what strategic significance this would have, because the Georgia and South Sandwich Islands were of little significance, and the southern Toul is within the Cook Island chain to the extreme southeast of Georgia and South Sandwich Islands. In fact, southern Toul is down here. It's not labeled too well. This is Central Islands. So I know that southern Toul is one of these two islands right here in the Cook Islands. So you can, if we pan out and take a look, you can see how far that is from, really this was where it was happening. This was the prime real estate right here, Falkland Island. Georgia and South Sandwich were part of the larger group, but they were uninhabited for the most part. I think there's just one village, I believe, that's on the Georgia island. It's a lot of fjords over here. Yeah, it's right there, Grytviken. The UK countered with diplomatic protest and temporarily stepped up its naval presence in the region. The dynamic of the relationship between Britain and Argentina had now become more delicate as tensions rose yet again. The build-up to war is mostly one-sided in that Argentina invaded the Falklands unprovoked. A long look at Argentina in the years preceding the conflict is the most beneficial method for any examination of the build-up to armed conflict between Argentina and Britain. An aggressive pro-national culture existed in post-World War II Argentina with the election of President Juan Perón in 1946. Together with his wife, the famous Eva, they inspired their nation to become proud and nationalistic. The Peróns became fanatical in their approach to governance, and by the mid-1950s were removed from office in a coup d'etat. Yet this culture of strong nationalism survived and carried over throughout the multiple regimes that plagued this country during the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. Perón returned to power for a brief period in the early 70s through an intermediary and was even re-elected to the presidency again in 73, though short-lived. Perón died in 1974, and his wife assumed the presidency through her administration, although her administration was short-lived as well as due to economic ruin and deteriorating support. What the Perón's return to office did do was to reinvigorate the ideology of Peronism and restore the strong culture of nationalism to the nation's growing population of youth. A military junta seized control of the Argentine government, as I stated previously, in 1976, and then it tightened its grip on the people of Argentina by regulating nearly everything. An escalation in tensions between the junta and the people of Argentina led to organized revolts and the formation of groups whose sole purpose was to undermine the junta. The revolts often became violent, and an insurgency developed at the height of what is known to Argentines as the Dirty War. By the early 1980s, the junta realized that their situation was critical, and at least 1,500 lives had been taken as a result of the Dirty War. In December 1981, General Leopoldo Galtieri was appointed as the new leader of the junta and president of Argentina. His mission was to bring about change to Argentina by reunifying the government and its people as the Peróns had done so successfully. His strategy was to reclaim the lost Malvinas and restore nationalism through the defeat of Britain. The initial invasion of the Falklands occurred only a few months after his assumption of office. In the days and weeks following the initial invasion, the public rallied behind Galtieri and the junta. His strategy was very successful as a unified Argentina had now come together to defeat the Anglo Empire and retake the Malvinas once and for all. General Galtieri was now officially President Galtieri in people's eyes. It was perceived that he was a true leader of the people. So this was the perfect opportunity for Galtieri, the junta, and even the people to demonstrate the strength of their unification under a common ideology. This colonialism would end, and now was the time. So this concludes the road to war. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for Chapter 1, The Invasion. And leave comments if you'd like to opine on whether or not the Argentines were correct in invading in order to end this colonialism, or if the Falklanders, by extension the Brits, were justified in their territorial claims dating back to 1833. Let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. See you next time.